Sometimes it's claimed that only Christians, fundamentalist Christians, this great bogeyman, have a problem with Darwinism. As a sociological matter, that's not true, and I say that as someone who knows the Orthodox Jewish community very well. Theologically, too, to the extent that Jews are aware of Jewish belief, a Jew must have a problem with Darwinism. We are instructed over and over again, for certainly in the Bible, in Jewish traditional texts, institutions, for example, the Sabbath, about the centrality of the idea that nature and life reflects God's purpose and intent. Now, the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, is perhaps the most central and defining institution in Judaism. And the way that we inaugurate the Sabbath each Friday night is through a sanctification over a cup of wine. It's called Kiddush. And when we say the sanctification, we stand. The reason we stand is because in a Jewish court of law, a witness giving testimony stands. And what we're doing when we begin the Sabbath, which is a commemoration of God's creativity in the universe, is we are giving testimony, standing, that the universe has a designer, if you will. And to deny that would be to deny the truth of our testimony each Sabbath. In Jewish theology and Jewish religious life, debates are often a sort of a game of capture the flag, where everyone wants to cite the names of famous rabbis who agree with your position. And it's certainly true that you can find ample rabbinic citations for the idea that the universe is not literally 6,000 years old. Certainly there's ample support for that. But the idea that nature does not reflect God's creativity, there is no rabbinic source that is traditional and authentic to Judaism that would say anything like that. And if you speak about the great names of the Talmudic period, the medieval period, the modern period, whether it's Maimonides or Ibn Ezra, or Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, or Joseph B. Soloveitchik, or Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, all of these great rabbinic thinkers addressed the issue of whether we find evidence of God's design in nature, and they are unanimous in prompting us to expect such evidence. One of the most grossly misrepresented Jewish thinkers on this particular issue is Maimonides. So you have someone like Leon Wieseltier, who's the literary editor of the New Republic, who wrote a piece not so long ago trying to claim Maimonides as a sort of proto-Darwinist, and he cited the famous 25th chapter of the second volume of the Guide of the Perplexed, but he reads only the first part of it and really egregiously distorts what Maimonides was saying. What people like Wieseltier say is that Maimonides was comfortable with any kind of allegorization of creation that you want, that you can take allegory as far as you please, and that's not true. When he gets to the end of that chapter in the Guide of the Perplexed, he says very clearly that there are limits to how much we can fool around with the idea of creation. And he wrote and taught in a context where there was a threat from Aristotelian philosophers who claimed that there was no beginning to the universe. The universe had always existed. And Maimonides said that someone who believes such a thing has made absolute nonsense of the Torah, has undermined completely the basis of the Torah's authority. And he says very clearly, you must understand this. And there's a scholar at the University of Chicago, Joel Kramer, who wrote a very recent and very good biography of Maimonides, where he says that for Maimonides, the greatest single theme in his scientific and philosophic writing was the defense of the idea of a creator. And Kramer, a scholar at the University of Chicago who knows what he's talking about, draws an explicit parallel to the debate today between Darwinists and advocates of intelligent design. He makes very clear, and he uses the word intelligent design, and makes very clear that Maimonides, were he alive today, would not be on the side of the Darwinists. He would be on the side of the advocates of intelligent design. Jewish defenders of Darwinism also will often cite a rabbi from the 19th century, Samson Raphael Hirsch as supposedly a supporter of evolution, because he did, in fact, write very reasonably that Judaism can make peace with the idea of a universe that is billions of years old. Hirsch did not make peace, however, with Darwinism and its moral implications in particular. And he writes about this in his Torah commentary, where he writes about the book of Numbers and the image of the idol of Baal Peor, which was worshipped in a terrible animalistic way. And Hirsch says very clearly that this is a parallel to Darwinism today, which lowers a person to the level of an animal. So he was very clear on the moral threat of Darwinian thinking. In classical rabbinic literature, in the Talmud, there's a name for a heretic that comes up over and over again. It's called an Epicurus. Literally, it means an Epicurean. In the Talmud, it says that such a person has no share in the world to come, meaning has no share in the blessing of an afterlife following death. And what's so serious about that? Well, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who wrote a famous theological disputation called the Kuzari, defined an Epicurean, an Epicurus, as someone who denies the evidence of God's creativity in nature. This is the classic word, the classic concept for a heretic in Judaism. So it's a very serious thing to take the side of Epicurus, the great ancient Greek philosopher, who said that nature is governed by an entirely material process, governed by chance. That is the very opposite of what Judaism says. There's a tremendous parallel between this idea in Judaism of an Epicurus, an Epicurean, a heretic on the one hand, and Darwinian atheism today. And one of the aphorisms in the Mishnah, in a tractate called Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the Fathers, says that we are obliged to know how to answer an Epicurus. We have to know how to refute a heretic. And so Jews are under a very serious obligation today to know how to respond intelligently to an atheist, to a Darwinian, to a modern day Epicurean. A great theme of Jewish thought in whether liturgy, scripture, philosophy, is the reciprocal love between God and ourselves. But the question is very reasonably put, how can a frail mortal arouse his love of God? And Maimonides, in the Mishnah Torah, which is his encyclopedic treatment of Jewish law and Jewish thought, says that the most accessible path to arousing your love of God is through the contemplation of the evidence of God's creativity in nature. Now, that's the way to do this very basic thing, to love God. But Darwinism tells us that there is no such route. There is no evidence of God's creativity in nature, and so therefore that route is closed to us.